Here are the 10 best ARC items. In at number 10, we've got the fabricated pistol, a nice little pistol device that does a healthy amount of damage when you inflict it on a target. I think it's a pretty reasonable weapon just for getting a lot of things done, and considering the bullets aren't too expensive and it's one of the cheaper options from the fabricator, I think it makes a great weapon. Perhaps not against Gacha Claws, we can't harm him, but against any just unwary enemy that gets in your way, the fabricated pistol is a great weapon to use in where you can just take down whatever you want, really, and it does the job. It gets the job done. Potentially not as good as some of the other guns on our list today, but it does a good healthy amount of damage, and again, the bullets are cheap and you can't really complain with that. Next up, we've got the good old Harpoon launcher with those nets attached. I think it is a great way of taking out some creatures and starting to tame them, because, you know, the bowler only works up to a certain point for creatures, but the net gun is great for everything and it gets them all down. Big creatures or small creatures, it has really made taming so much easier and so much more efficient. Of course, you have to be wary of timings, but considering the Harpoon launcher is also useful for a few other things, although now I think is obviously most used for these net projectiles, I think it is a very good weapon to have in your roster, especially if you like your taming. And I think personally, a lot of us like our taming. And also, if you've got pesky compy following you, you can simply net those things down and get away no problem. Of course, you can use a bowler as well, but where's the fun in that, right? You can test out your new net gun and start netting everything. Originally, you'd have to use things like chain bowlers, but as you can see, this is so much more compact and efficient than the chain bowler, and, you know, that would only work for bigger creatures. The net projectile works on any sort of medium-sized creature as well, which is a step up from the bowler for sure, and you don't have to be an insanely high level to start using that. You can see I took that Kano down, and now it's Gacha's dinner, but, you know, we'll leave that Kano alone. I'm sure it's having a great time. Coming up next, we've got the simple, humble spear, and, you know, what can really go wrong with a spear in the early game, because we are covering the 10 best weapons, and although perhaps this isn't the highest when it comes to durability and damage dealing, there's no doubt that in the early game it is a very, very useful weapon, as it is an extremely cheap one to make and offers good solutions in tackling enemies. And it's also not too bad for gathering up meat as well. You can see we are gathering a pretty healthy sum there with the spear, of course, and I think, you know, it really does work its weight for the level you're at. Obviously, you're not going to be using this thing into the late game, but in the early game stages, this is really one of your main lines of defense, and it works really effectively for that. You can even throw it and cover a long amount of range too. I think the spear is a perfect little device for running around and getting the job done in the early stages of the game, of course, because you really can get so much done with a spear. And although you're not going to be using it in the late game, of course, I think it is invaluable in the early game, and that's why I put it on the list. Next up, though, we have got the bow and arrow, and possibly this is the upgrade to the spear in the early game, as it covers a longer range and can do quite a bit more damage than something like a spear if used effectively. I think, considering it's a level 10 item as well, it does pack a little bit more than the spear and is obviously more useful. But I'm not just putting the normal bow on the list. The compound bow works wonders as well, and although a Dilo is a small target, it still does work very effectively, and you can see that mass amount of damage which has been dealt through with that. The compound bow is definitely an upgrade to the bow, although not many people's favorites and not really a preferred weapon to use. I still think it is good with the bow as well on top of it, because you're going to be using the bow in the early game, but I do like the compound bow in the late game. I think it works wonders for taking out some things when you don't want to use a gun. And I think that is where the compound bow is most effective in use, but mainly the bow is what we're talking about here. And they have the added benefit of trank arrows, and obviously with trank arrows you can start to knock out creatures as well, which is better than just the previous mentioned damage dealing which we've got from the previous weapons. Now you can also start taming your dinos up as well, which I think adds to the whole thing too. Where as a weapon which is just used for fighting is great, a weapon that can also be used for taming is perhaps even greater in the long run. You could just absolutely pelt arrows into this raptor and hopefully it can become your new friend. Another jack of all trades when it comes to weapons is the long neck, which we've got here, and this of course works with your normal standard bullet, but it can also be used with trank arrows, which I think perhaps even makes it more effective as well. If it was just a generic gun, then I wouldn't put it so highly on the list, but with the advantage of trank arrows and then later on shocking tranquilizer darts, and although yes they're more expensive, they are still very effective and are definitely much more effective for knocking things out, and they're sort of the pinnacle of what you're going to be using to knock things out. They deal so much torpor with each shot. It is insane what you can get out of these shocking tranks versus something like a trank arrow which you get from a bow. It is by far the most effective way of knocking out a creature, and obviously with the added gun capabilities as well, you can add a scope and do all things like that. It is great for sniping and general combat too, and considering its durability is quite high, there definitely isn't anything lost going out and shooting some stuff with the long neck. Now, possibly controversially, we have got the crossbow, and the reason why I put this higher than the long neck is also the fact that it can be used underwater. It's much cheaper than the long neck, and again still has that same use in normal arrows and metal arrows on top of all of it as well. While the compound bow deals far more damage and obviously can use trank arrows, it lacks on the durability side of things, and of course doesn't work underwater. Of course the harpoon launcher is great for underwater tames as well. I think the crossbow is usually the way that I go, and I think the way many others go in this department as well. I think compared to a lot of other items in the game, the crossbow is by far used by more people, and particularly is effective as well, considering its low cost and the fact that you can use those tranks and normal arrows on top of everything else too. And of course they work underwater, as I've already mentioned, and this does make them effective combating tools, as who doesn't want to use this amazing crossbow which also works underwater if you're doing any underwater taming, perhaps sneaking up on this Spino and start going for it. It really does make the crossbow very versatile, which is what I can't say about some of the other weapons on this list, but that's why I've ranked it up so highly. Perhaps my favorite melee weapon item is the pike, and this truly is what it is for me. The pike is far superior to the spear, and of course if you go up and you get an ascended one of these things too, it can work even better for all of your arc fighting needs. Just go up to literally anything. Let's take this scorpion here, and you can just start pumping damage straight into this thing. Of course we've got a primitive one here, but it still is doing hefty amounts of damage at fast rates too, and considering this scorpion is a level 1350, we really can't complain with the fact that it hasn't already killed this thing. It is an amazing weapon, and you know, some people might vastly prefer swords, but I am definitely a pike person when it comes to all of this weaponry, and the pike is really a great one for me, and I use it a heck of a lot, which is why obviously I've chucked it on this list. The pike is just such a great melee weapon, because when creatures get up close, it's always the thing which I turn to first, and of course you can always run away too, but it adds the extra little element of defense which perhaps you wouldn't get from some of the more ranged weapons on this list. Now, my favorite gun in the game has to go to this pump action shotgun. It really just excels above everything else in the department of just getting damage done, because it outputs just so much damage and so many bullets in one go. But it has the added bonus that in third person, this thing reloads 6 times faster than in first person. So it is a fast reloading gun that deals a heck of a lot of damage if all the bullets land. And for that, I love this gun to bits. And the ammo really isn't expensive. It doesn't use 6 ammunition for each shot. It just uses 1. Although it does multiple amounts of damage in one go. And again, Ascendant 1 will work leagues above all the rest of the guns which you'd see on this list as well. And for that reason, loads of people use it, and I'm definitely an advocate of using this gun, especially in that third person mode where you can get even more damage dealt. And you can always resort to something like a Pike if creatures get up even more close and personal, but it still does work effectively against close ranged attacks. Perhaps controversially, in at the number 2 spot, I have got the bowler. I just said earlier though, with the net projectiles, that they're better than the bowlers, and while yes, they are better and they can get more creatures under the net, I do think the bowler is still a better item and is more useful, as it is unlocked way sooner and can help so much in the beginning. It's sort of for the same reason that the spear was on the list as well as the pike, although I've decided to put this higher as the bowler is great in PvP scenarios against other players, as of course you can bowler other players too, but it's great for taming pteranodons in the early game or sort of early mid stages of the game, and in the early game offers you a lot of protection against creatures like raptors and dilos, which you may not be able to run away from in some cases. And for that reason, I think the bowler is the second best arc item. It is incredibly useful and it will do leagues for your progress in the early stages. While the net projectile is obviously the upgrade further on, it is far more expensive and you need to be at least level 40, I think, to unlock that and start using it. And, you know, of course, with the expenses, it's not the greatest thing either. That rock really scuffed me out there. But before we get into number 1, I've got this little thing in my hand here, also known as the torch. And while, yes, it's not only just a thing for the night, I think it has some other great uses, namely in the sense of insects. Insects are by far some of the most annoying things in the game, and wouldn't you want a fantastic way to kill them and get rid of them? Well, the torch is your answer. If you simply swing it around, you can see all the insects catch on fire, and this is by far the most effective and cheapest way to get all those insects dead. And I think that is the main reason why this torch deserves the honorable mention. It's not just a thing I use for lighting up my night, and in fact I barely ever do that because gamma commands exist. It is my number 1 insect killer. Again, if you get an Ascendant one, the durability is much better, but I always carry several torches on me and just whack the hell out of insects whenever they come near me. And a second one broke as well. We'll pretend like that doesn't exist and we'll jump our way into number 1. In the number 1 spot for the best arc item, I think it's pretty obvious. We have got the pick, the hatchet, and the hatchet in both metal and stone variants. Now, some people might say, well, why don't you just put the metal ones on here? Again, the metal ones are far more expensive and you need them later in the game. And obviously the reason why they're here is therefore all your basic essential resources. Now, you can complete arc without any of the other weapons on this list, and in fact, you know, to some extent you could complete arc without these items as well, as you can punch trees to get it. But harvesting any sort of rocks, if you don't have an Anki and you're going to be needing metal for that, which you need a pick to get in the first place, you're going to need one of these things, and you're going to need both of these things really to excel your progress through the game, and no other item is going to do it. Without these things, the game's progression system is broken. They play such a big role in all of it. Obviously, the upgrade path from stone to metal is the natural progression further, but they are both needed to be here, as you really can't start without this one. But this is obviously the better pickaxe, and then same for the hatchets as well. But they're all incredibly essential, and for harvesting things like rocks and getting all of this stuff and metal and getting all of that done in the first place, while the Anki may be the upgrade path later on, I still think these are the most essential item, as you can't get there in the first place without these tools.
In at number 10, we have got the Crystal Wyvern, and this creature is really important to me when it comes to cool art creatures. You can kind of say the Wyverns in general fall under this same bracket, as you know, who doesn't love a really good dragon? I know they're not actually dragons. I don't want to get blasted for that in the comments, but they are very dragon-esque and dragon-like. You get a similar feel from them, and the reason why I put the Crystal Wyvern here is the Blood Crystal Wyvern. Its ability is just, it's really cool to me. Also, they have the hydration buff, which seems a little bit unnecessary, but you know, if you want to dip those little wings into the water while you're flying along, I guess you can, and get the hydration buff. That's nice. And also just the general normal Crystal Wyvern is pretty cool as well. And again, the normal Wyverns just are cool creatures inherently in what they are, how they look like, and their taming method is pretty cool as well. The taming method for the Crystal Wyverns isn't really as cool, because you're not going into like a wyvern nest and stealing their eggs. You're just going and passive taming one of these things. But I do largely prefer the Crystal Wyverns, and with that Blood Crystal Wyvern, it really puts them in a higher spot for me over the normal Wyverns. So obviously that's why I put these things here, but you could kind of say the normal Wyverns are here as well, as I would admit they are still all very cool creatures. Next up, we have got the Rock Drake, and no one says that the Rock Drake isn't a really cool creature. Like, you look at this thing, like, come on, look at it. It's so cool in its design and everything that it really stands for, and its abilities as well, as I'm pretty sure this was the first glider. You could say the Archaeopteryx is a glider, but not in this format. It's not a hang glider that you can use. Also, the Cinemacrops is so much better than the Archaeopteryx, which is why you should never tame that creature, and in my opinion that's one of the worst Arc tames. Really not worth it. But no, the Rock Drake is significantly better than the Archaeopteryx. It deals tons of damage. It also can absolutely cheese the final boss if you have some Lazarus Chowder on Arboration. Not on any other maps, but you know, that's still nice that you can do that. And obviously they're kind of your main way of getting around on that map, and there are so many things to grab on Arboration that, you know, you can really utilize a glider like this to its fullest, because the Maywing can't really like grapple onto any of the surrounding area, but the Rock Drake can. So obviously it makes the Rock Drake much more suited to Operation, but the Maywings are more suited to Gen 2. And actually, I'm pretty sure the Maywing isn't even on this list anyway. I haven't put it here because the Maywing is essentially just a platypus, and although platypuses are cute and all that, it really doesn't invoke the absolute coolness within a creature. And the Rock Drake really is a cool creature. You can't deny it. It did something new when it came out, and it's got a really nice design, and it really fits in well with the map. Next up, we've got the Giga, and you could probably say one of the reasons why I'm picking this tier is just nostalgia reasons, and I'm not actually putting the Crocodonsaurus here because I didn't get that same kind of feeling with it for being such a great creature, whereas with the Giga, I do. Although I do believe that the Crocodonsaurus is a better creature than the Giga. Just that feeling of when you tame your Giga for a first time, it's such a cool creature. And considering this thing came out in 2016, it's been in art for a while now, so it really does kind of make sense to me why I would put this thing on the list instead of the Crocodonsaurus. Like, it's a really big hunking carnivore, and back in the day it was like the biggest thing out there. I'm not actually sure when the Titanosaur released, but it was, you could tame this thing, and obviously you tame the Titanosaur as well, but like, this is pre-Titanosaur, I'm pretty confident, if my memory hasn't not served me well in that sense. Yeah, the Giga, it's so cool, it's so big, and it deals a hefty amount of damage, and although it might be a little bit dated nowadays, I still really have that coolness factor when thinking of this creature. Here at number 7, we have got the Desmodus, and this creature just has an ability which inherently makes it really cool. It can tame creatures really quickly, as with Sanguine Elixir. To cheat, you can just essentially get 30% of that tamement done with just a click of a button. These things can also gather blood bags, and for once now there is a bat in Arc, which I actually don't hate to death, because the Onyx is definitely not a creature which I like in any way, shape or form. They give you Mega Rabies, not great, all of that, and they're in caves and they're annoying, but this thing is very much not annoying. You can ride it, you can glide around on it, it's actually a really fast flyer. You can grapple onto all kinds of terrain as well, like a Tapijara would. Just make sure to not press E while you're in this to kind of get out of this state, because I'm sure someone's done it, and then that's just going to mean you dismount the creature and you probably die. But if you always carry parachutes on you, then that might not happen to you. But either way, Desmodus, really cool creature. Now, it might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I'm putting the Megalodon up next, and this is just mainly because I really like sharks. There's just something about sharks to me that are inherently cool, and the Megalodon is in Ark, and this was kind of like one of the first ocean creatures in the game. And back in the day, this was pretty much all you had in the ocean, and that's why I've got such strong memories of this creature. Again, yeah, maybe not going to be the best Ark creature, but this isn't the best Ark creatures to me. This is what I think are the coolest Ark creatures, and I always have to put the Megalodon here because of my just general love of sharks, and they're really interesting creatures to me. And the Megalodon, just it further amplifies it. It's like a really big shark that you can go around on and just absolutely decimate things with. And it also deals the bleed ability as well, which plays a huge ability to this creature. Obviously back in the day it didn't have that, because I'm pretty sure the bleed ability didn't really exist, but obviously it did have a TLC, and now it can do this, and it just makes it an even better creature. And I really do love the Megalodon to death, even if maybe you don't like it so much. Here at number 5, we have got the Vonaur, and this creature is one of those where no other creature is really like this thing. Like, it is just so packed with abilities. Maybe not packed with abilities, sorry, I worded that wrong. It's got such a unique ability that it warrants being on the coolest Ark creatures list, as who doesn't want a literal living turret that you can go around on and decimate creatures with? I know I've used that word a lot, but you really can deal some serious damage. And although when you level up melee damage, it doesn't increase the damage of these bullets, you can always level up your stamina, and then you can have a really, really heavy hitting one, and you can always go for a higher level Vonaur as well. I would pretty much always go for the highest level. They're really not very difficult to tame, and you've got the Vonaurs on Gen 2 as well, so you've got an even better version of the creature. And I know loads of you out there really do like this creature, and it kind of looks like from this B-roll you can get 2 people on a Vonaur at once. I'm not sure if you actually can, but it looks like there's a second seat there, and I've never actually thought of that, I've just noticed it. So you probably can get 2 people on one Vonaur, or you can't, but either way, that actually slightly confused me because I've never seen that in the B-roll before. Let's continue on. Next up, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is so packed with abilities. Probably why I said that with the Vonaur, because I was looking at this creature as it was next up on the list after the Vonaur, and when I say this thing is packed with abilities, it really is. And also, who doesn't want a lionfish lion? That is its kind of general code name in the game. Like, if you look at this thing in the game files, or you want to spawn it in with a command, you're going to use lionfish lion, and you know, it does kind of make sense. It's a lion meeting a fish, so that makes sense. Either way, they have insane just general mobility, as you can see there, and they also do have the hydration buff. Makes a lot more sense than the hydration buff on the Crystal Wyvern. They have the pack buff. They can't deal the bleed ability, otherwise they'd probably be way too OP. They're really mobile in the water. They can also go invisible too, and they can charge up their attacks over time to deal loads of damage. Their only real downside, and the not cool thing about them, is their taming method, because it's an absolute pain. But once you've got past that and you've got yourself some really high level Shadowmanes, I would recommend just getting a male and female, really high level, breeding them. You're going to have so much fun with these creatures. Now, who doesn't love a really good Reaper? And in the number 3 spot, we have got the Reaper, and this creature just, it reeks coolness in a sense. I don't know why I would describe it like that, but you know, it kind of makes sense. This thing probably doesn't smell particularly nice whatsoever, but at least smell-o-vision has not been invented yet, and maybe hopefully it won't come to the commercial market. It's not really something which we need, or that might be what you need, but for me, definitely not. And this thing really does pack a punch in the damage department, which usually does play in getting a really cool creature. Like, you have a creature that deals so much damage, it's big, it's bulky, it's beefy, it really packs a punch, and this creature does. And its taming method is like so interesting as well. It really does make you feel like you've truly achieved something amazing once you've actually fully tamed and raised one of these things, because it is definitely a lengthy process, especially on Operation. Doesn't really feel as great on Gen 2, as the Reaper could literally be your first tame on the map, and you know, that seems a little bit cheaty, but Gen 2 is generally that kind of map, which is why I tend to stray away from it a little bit more. I kind of prefer the more primitive side, which I kind of think stops after extinction really, and extinction kind of goes off a little bit, but I still think extinction kind of works because those bosses are insanely difficult. Next up, we have got the Deinonychus, and this thing can deal bleed damage to bosses, which is partly why it's here, and it's just such a great creature for everything. It generally just has to be on here. It's such a mobile creature, it's so easy to tame as well. Its tame method isn't the least interesting. It's kind of pretty much the wyvern tame, except a lot easier because you don't have to go into a wyvern trench. You just need to go around the chalk cliffs biome, and then boom, you can find yourself a Deinonychus nest and tame yourself a Deinonychus, unless those eggs don't spawn, a bug that probably wildcard will never fix, especially because like it's on old Ark, so nothing's really gonna come new to that game anymore. But as you can see, that Deinonychus absolutely decimated that Bronto there, and like these things also have the pack buff, so you can really get through some bosses quickly. Unless you're on extinction, then I wouldn't use them, because you kind of need Gigas or Carcharodonsauruses for that. Probably Carcharodonsauruses actually, because they're a lot more reliable than the Giga, but they do take a little bit longer to tame, so depends which way you want to go. You just really do need something for maps like extinction, but that makes sense, doesn't it, really, when you think over it. And the Deinonychus, yeah, not going to defeat the Titans, but every other boss it pretty much will, and it's got really great mobility on top of that as well. I've probably already talked about this, but still, it can scale up walls. It doesn't take any fall damage, which is a really nice benefit, and it's generally just a really nice, cool creature, which is why I've got it in at the number 2 spot. And in at number 1, I've got the Blood Stalker, and I might be getting a lot of disagreement here with the coolest art creature being this thing, or something might say it's the Reaper or the Shadowbane or something like that. Well, I personally think this thing is cool, and for spider lovers out there, no, I mean spider haters out there, you probably don't agree with me, as this is a very spiderish-y creature, if that's even a sentence. But I really like the way it moves, the way it looks as well. I'm always kind of fascinated with creatures like this. It doesn't really ick me out as per such. I kind of embrace it more, and it's such a great underwater creature. Like, it's so useful, which makes it really cool for me, as it's maybe that wasn't its original intended use, although it did have some design around underwater travel and just general water travel, as you'd use it a lot on the Gen 1 ocean biome, as it's kind of your main travel mount. So yeah, it kind of has been designed for that, but people don't really usually give it a lot of credit and merit for that, and that's why I think that this is the coolest art creature, because it actually finally gives me a creature which is really reliable for general underwater travel. Also, I really like its design. Its tame method, when it came out, was very new and inventive, the exact same as the Desmodus's. Obviously, it can't get loads of blood bags. Kind of would make sense if it did, but you know, that just didn't happen back in the day. You just need to extract them from your own body. And also, I kind of, it is a slight hindrance, but when its health gets really low, it kind of eats health out of you as well. Unless you've got blood bugs in your inventory, it will eat those. It's such a nicely designed creature, full of loads of abilities, with a really great model design and just some really great uses, that I have to put this thing at the number 1 spot. I'll probably get some disagreement for this, but personally, for me, this deserves to be here.
And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Macy-Juski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.